Okay, and welcome to Congruent Triangles. Now, in our previous class, we learned about the side property and the side angle side property. And I want you to know something here. When we look at this triangle as given, what do we see here? Well, we see, oh, you know what, let me switch to a brighter color. We see an angle, and then we see here, we see another angle, and then we see here, we see a side. Now notice I have isolated just one of these triangles. Whenever we're comparing the congruency of one triangle to another, well, we look at the order of one and then compare it again to the order of the other. Now, the second thing I'll say is that this configuration right here is the most difficult for students to typically see. So notice, if I start at this little angle right here and I go this way, I'm really only skipping over just this little side right here. And so what do we see? Okay, well, we see first there's an angle, we see second there's an angle, and then we round this corner and wait a second. The third thing that we see is a side. So in fact, these are neither congruent by side, nor side, angle, side. In fact, this triangle right here would be congruent by angle, angle, side, or AAS. So let me write it out. Angle, angle, side. Okay, these are examples that you have to see a lot of to really understand, so let's move on. Okay, so let's take a look at this one right here. So, I see first, I see an angle, and we could say, you know, it is a right angle. Maybe that's important. We also see a side. And wait a second, in order to prove triangles congruent, we need at least 3 pieces of information. But here, in each triangle, so I can say, you know, hey, here's my left triangle, and here is my right triangle. In both of these things, we really only see 2 pieces of information. So let me just kind of undo that right there, and that circle. So where are we going to find the third piece of information? Now this is one of the most common tricks that they'll use. They'll use these 2 intersecting lines. Wait a second, what do we know about 2 intersecting lines? They create vertical angles. And what do we know about vertical angles? Well, vertical angles are congruent. So what we're really saying is, wait a second, now we see an angle. So what are the 3 congruent triangle properties that we've seen before? Well, we have seen side, side, side. We've seen side, angle, side, and we've seen angle, angle, side. Well, this is none of those. In fact, this, as we look in this order, we would say the first thing that we see is an angle. The second thing we see is the side. And the third thing we see is an angle. And so these triangles are congruent by ASA, or angle, side, angle. Okay, finish taking the notes. Let's move on to our third example. Okay, here we have example 3, and let's go ahead and isolate the pieces of information that we see in this triangle off to the left. I see our little tick mark here, so I know that this is a side. I see 2 tick marks here, so I know that that is a side. And it looks like we only have 2 pieces of information. Well, recall, whenever 2 lines intersect, they form vertical angles, and aha, we actually have now shown ourselves a third piece of information, which will be an angle. Now, the order with which you say these things is correct. So it doesn't matter if we start here at the bottom or here at the top, but we always want to then move to the closest piece of information. So here, the very first thing I see is a side. As I move around the triangle, the next thing that I see is the angle. And as I move around the triangle more, you know, the third thing that I see here is a side. So wait a second, we've actually seen this property of congruence before. These triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. Okay, let's move on to our fourth example. Okay, here in our fourth example, we have another type of little trick that people like to play. I want y'all to notice this line right here. And here's the question I would ask you about this line. Does this line touch both triangles? And of course, I would hope that you would say yes. This line is the right-hand side of our left triangle, and this line is also the leftmost side of our right triangle. Now, what do we call this line here in the middle? What is the special little name I want to give it? We're going to call this the shared side. Anytime you see two triangles next to each other and the line is the same length, well, of course, we were going to call that our shared side. And I'll give that 1, 2, 3 tick marks. Well, what do we have here? Is this an angle or a side? It's a side. What do we have here? Another side. And wait a second, we also have a side. Of course, this is our first property that we learned of side, side, side. Okay, let's move on to one final example. Okay, here's our fifth and final example. So notice here, we have a triangle, and much like number one, it has two congruent sides. And it is important to remember that whenever we have two congruent sides, well, we have an isosceles, let's not forget that E, we have an isosceles triangle. So not only does it have two congruent sides, it also has two congruent base angles. Now, let's go ahead and let's order these things. And this might seem a little juvenile at first. Let's see. So we have here our angle, our side, and we have here another angle, and here we have another angle as well. And wait a second, you know what? I was actually thinking this was a different example. My apologies. So let's just go ahead and say this. Well, this is congruent by side, angle, angle. So wait a second, side, angle, angle. Doesn't that sound familiar? Have we heard this before? Of course we have. This was our very first example, just shown a different way. This is angle, angle, side. All right, I hope that these helped, and good luck on this next section.